Welcome everyone to another edition of Play It Through, and on this edition it's Excitebike, Bun Bun Mario Battle Stadium for the Super Famicom, brought to us by Nintendo. Excitebike, Bun Bun Mario Battle Stadium is another one of the Satellaview games, but unlike many other Satellaview games which made either modifications or changes to already existing titles, this game was actually a brand new game, using the same kind of gameplay as the original Excitebike, except adding various Mario characters to the mix. Like many of the other Satellaview games, it was broken up into weekly intervals, with the first two of the episodes being done in May of 97, and then almost half a year later, it was November of 1997 for episodes 3 and 4 of Excitebike. If you're unfamiliar with any of the Satellaview games, it was a broadcast service via satellite in Japan for the Super Famicom and was a subscription service. Whenever a game was being broadcast, you had to be playing during that exact time, and you would download the game to your system and be able to play along. There was usually voice acting as well as music that was done through the live satellite feed, so you could get things above the Super Famicom's sound quality, such as full-blown orchestral tracks and full-blown voice acting. Each of the episodes or weeks of the Excitebike game ended up adding more characters to the mix, with the first week having Mario, Luigi, and Kanopo, also known as Toad. They added Wario in week 2, Princess Peach in week 3, and then they added Yoshi in the 4th week. But they ended up removing Luigi for Yoshi in order to do so. While of course it's impossible to replicate the exact broadcast of these games from their original 97 versions, there are thankfully some ROMs out there for many of the Satellaview games that have been patched so that we can now play them in as much of its glory as we possibly can. This is actually a patched version of week number 4 that includes Mario, Peach, Toad, Wario, and Yoshi. In this run, I will be playing as Wario, and as we make it into the game itself, after selecting our character, you'll then see the first course. It'll actually take you through the entire map of that course, and then you'll jump into the level itself. Satellaview games were based on the real-life clock. As you can see in the upper left corner, that clock would start to tick down, and it would always start each game at 5 minutes after the hour in order for everyone to be able to download it and be ready, and then usually would end at 50 minutes after the hour so that there could be some saving and cleanup and scores and all that sort of thing. Because of the time restraints, even in this version, basically each of the maps is broken up into these time intervals, so you have a set amount of time that you can spend on given maps. Before jumping into the race of a course though, you're allowed to actually do a practice laps, like you can see here, where you can get the feel of the track before jumping in. Now, you can do as many laps, up to 10, I think, in the practice laps, before then you can jump into the main race. This was all originally timed, but thanks to the ROM patching, we can skip through this at any time and move on to the main race. And then once we complete that, we'll move on to the bonus game, and then on to course number 2. One of the added additions that makes this version of Excitebike so fun is not only, of course, the Mario characters, but the fact that you can collect coins in the game. You get coins on the map as well as from knocking out your opponents. And then once you get enough coins, you'll actually go into super mode. You'll start flashing and you'll have infinite turbo. Normally in Excitebike, when you use the turbo, if you end up using it for too long, your bike will end up overheating and you'll be pulled to the side of the road, have to wait a few moments for the engine to cool down, and then you can jump back on your bike and continue along the race. The Super version, though, will not go away until you end up crashing at any point. Now, this may be into another enemy or just crashing on a jump, but either way, once you crash, you do lose it and you'll have to earn it once again. What's cool, though, is you can actually earn the star power, the super power, in the practice laps, and then actually carry that over to the actual main race. Since I still spent a little bit more time doing some practice laps here on this, I'm going to fast forward ahead until we begin that first race of Excitebike Bun Bun Mario Studio. If you're wondering what Bun Bun actually means, it's supposed to replicate the sound of a revving engine in Japanese, but saying it here just sounds a bit silly, of course. After your practice laps, you'll get to see all the times you have for each of those practice laps. Then you'll have Princess Peach holding up a sign indicating course number 1, and then it's time to finally race. You'll have your other opponents there, Toad, Peach, and Mario, as your front runners who are always going to be at the head of the pack. And then the rest of the racers in the race are actually Koopa Troopas, red and green Koopa Troopas. Like I mentioned earlier, if you're already familiar with Excitebike, you'll be able to play this game right away. And anyone who loved that game and always wished there was a true sequel, this is the best that we could possibly get, and unfortunately, there was no way it was ever repackaged or released in any form outside, unfortunately, of the Satellaview. Basically, with Excitebike, your goal is, of course, to go as fast as you can on the laps, but learning the mechanics of how the bike moves while in mid-air so that you can hold the bike forward to potentially get more speed or hold it back to get more air, and then having to move it in the air so that you can land properly. You need to land on slopes in the right angle or you'll end up crashing. On big stretches, you got to make sure that you land perfectly straight so that you'll be able to continue on without accidentally crashing. Just being tipped up or down just slightly will cause you to end up crashing upon your landing. There's a few different types of terrain besides just your normal ramps. You'll have the kind of big hills of a couple of different sizes. You'll have the big ramps which will end up launching you pretty far forward. You're going to have piles of dirt or sand that will obviously slow you down if you land in them, so you're going to want to get out of those as quick as possible. The mini puddles that of course will also slow you down, but since they're a little bit smaller, it won't last as long. And then you're also going to have these really small strips that you actually have to do small wheelies if you end up driving over them so that you'll be able to not crash. If you drive over them normally, you'll end up crashing your bike. So if you can't avoid them, you'll have to do little wheelies. And we'll actually see that a little bit later on in some of the harder courses. This is our final lap of the first race, and dealing with your opponents, because they do have those rubber band-like physics, so they're always catching up on you. Thankfully, the game puts an arrow at where your opponents are coming up from behind you, so you can move into that lane if you want to, or get out of that lane if you think they're going to end up crashing into you at any point. One of the fun aspects of the game overall is being able to knock into your opponents when they're on the bikes. As long as you're in front of them when you run into them, you can actually knock them off their bike and be able to easily keep going. One of the awesome, really cool additions to this version of the game is the jump contest. There's two different kinds. This one where it's just a straight jump contest to see how far you can get, and then they have one where you'll be jumping over boos for bonus points. I love the background here. It's very much from Super Mario World 2 Yoshi's Island and has some nice scrolling and colors overall. Mastering the mechanics of course, the jumping itself is the key to see how much of a high score you can get here. You'll have several jumps, and you can keep making jumps until the clock reaches a certain amount, in which case you'll then be moved on to the next practice course. I'm far from perfect when it comes to the jumping. My goal usually is to make sure that I'm able to hit the final ramp wherever it is at the best speed in order to launch myself into the air. Unfortunately, sometimes due to bouncing of the ramps, you'll miss certain ramps. The more ramps that you're able to hit, though, seemingly the more speed that you end up gaining. And if you're able to hit all the ramps and still land and hit that final ramp, you should be able to launch yourself much, much farther. The timing on this is very difficult to try to just get your bike angled, make sure that you don't go too high up into the air so that you'll be able to land and hit the next ramp. And then once you hit that final ramp, or you're going over into the actual distance part, you want to land as flat as possible. The flatter you end up having your bike, or straighter that you end up having your bike, the more bonus points you'll get. You'll get 1,600 bonus points if you're able to land solidly flat. Once the clock hits a certain time, though, it will end up ending, and then we'll show you your points for course number 1, including your jump as well as whatever rank you got in the race. You'll get bonus points. Most of the Satellaview games in general were all about getting a high score, so that is included here. After the results screen, you'll then move on to course 2. Just like before, we can do a practice version, which I recommend if you play the game yourself to do that practice race just enough so that you can collect enough coins in order to get that super meter. You can then continue on if you want to just get a feel for the course, and some of the harder ones here definitely do a lap or two before jumping into the main race just to help you out. Here's those smaller little strips that you have to do the little wheelies over, because basically it'll hit the wheel and then push you downwards. So when you hit one with a wheelie, your front wheel will then come down and you'll land safely. Even just a slight wheelie will allow you to do that though. After practicing though a couple of times, I move on then to the main race itself. As you saw probably during the practice lap that I was doing for this course, it is definitely a bit more challenging. Going in with the super though, of course, so I can hold down that turbo button for the majority of the race will definitely end up helping out. Later races though, it can be really tough just not to crash at all and be able to maintain that turbo. Always be very cautious when we end up going over those little bumps, being able to quickly hit back on the D-pad so that you'll be able to do those slight wheelies and be able to land safely. They come at you so fast and there's so many little puddles that these courses actually are quite challenging if you're not very familiar with Excitebike and the way it plays and the way the bike controls in general. Hit this ramp here during this course, you have to hit it with a nice angle so that you'll be able to get enough height to be able to get on top of it. A few times I ended up crashing during some of my practices with that particular jump in this race. Your opponents can come up from behind you at any moment, so you always have to be on the ball and get into the right lane, or if you want to let them pass because you're not sure if you're going to be able to time it right to end up hitting them, just get out of the way as far as possible. Sometimes it's better to take the safer route and go between puddles or go around dirt piles, even if an enemy is coming up from behind you, because they may end up just hitting that dirt or hitting the puddle or crashing altogether as they're trying to make their way forward. Located on some of the courses are also the hidden Mario Gold statues, which are another thing that appears in a few of the Satellaview games. Finding the hidden statues will end up netting you some bonus points to go along with your high score. Just like the first race, all the races in the game end up having 5 laps for you to complete as part of the actual main race. After the 5th lap is complete, you'll then move on to the next bonus round. Even if you hang back a lot during the earlier parts of the races, the final lap, of course, make sure that you have that superpower ready to go and then blast forward as much as possible. You only take 1 lap, really, to catch back up with your opponents. They're never really too far ahead of you overall, as long as you've been able to keep at least a steady pace. So don't fret too much if you're behind in 3rd or 4th place going into that final lap. Either way, once it's complete, we celebrate with a little wheelie before moving on to the jump contest. Now for this one, the ramps are a little bit different. You can hit the 2nd ramp in mid-air before landing and then hitting the 3rd ramp. This is a much funner, much easier long jump, in my opinion, than the first one. It's much easier to hit the ramps and to land solidly and be able to get a better jump. Either way though, I'm still not the best when it comes to these long jumps in general. I usually only can get between 30 and 40 overall. After doing a couple of jumps and getting a halfway decent one, I usually just let the time run out and then move on. Now, instead of going right into course number 3, we now get to do the Boo bonus game. In this game, you have as many jumps as you can during the course of the time limit. Once the time runs out, the total number of boos that you jump over during the course of the bonus game will be calculated, and you'll get some bonus points. The jumps are, of course, different heights that you'll have to make it in order to get it past the boos. If you land on the boo, you don't end up crashing or anything, but going through a boo, of course, won't give you the bonus points, so if you go through one, just keep focusing and then get ready for that next jump, and hope that you'll be able to clear it and be able to get some of those bonus boos. When you make it to the boo bonus game, the clock will tick down, and you'll have 30 seconds in order to complete that set of jumps. So you can go slowly or go a little bit faster. Either way, you'll have plenty of time if you go for it to be able to make it over all the jumps. Once you reach the goal, the amount of boos that you ended up getting will be calculated, and then you'll go back to the beginning and be able to do the jump again. And you can keep repeating this as many times as the clock will allow you to before you'll then be forced to move on to the next course. So this is a great way to get some extra bonus points, especially if your score's not where you quite want it. Maybe you didn't finish in first, or you didn't have the best bonus jump. Usually I'm able to complete the bonus game 3 times all the way through before it ends up moving me forward. Once the boo game is done, you'll then move on to course 3. Like always, you'll be seeing the entire course all the way through before then getting ready to do the practice laps. The third course is even tougher than the second course, so it'll definitely put those Excitebike skills to the test. I recommend at least, of course, doing 1 lap and gathering enough coins so that you'll have the super ability, and be careful, of course, not to crash during the practice laps, or you'll have to recollect those coins. You'll also find hidden coins, and you get bonus coins for, of course, knocking into your opponents as well during the main race. Unfortunately, I don't follow my own advice during the little practice lap here and ended up crashing, so it takes me a little bit longer to get that super ability. But once I felt like I practiced enough, got my super, it's time to move on to the main race. As race number 3 begins, of course, using my super to immediately get ahead of a couple of the opponents. Mario shoots way forward at the beginning of this particular race, but quickly ends up running into a couple of dirt piles, and then I end up running into him. There is a lot of puddles and dirt and just a lot of stuff to watch out for during this course. Thankfully, the AI isn't too rough here, as they're never going to perfectly complete a lap usually during the course of the race. They're always going to be either slowing down or probably crashing all together into one of the various different platforms and all throughout the course itself. Thankfully, after my crash, it doesn't take me too long to get my coins back so that I can get back into the super mode, and even though I'm not in first going into the second lap, it won't be too long before I'm able to catch back up to Mario, thankfully. Sometimes, but not often, the Koopa Troopas will actually be able to move themselves up into third or second place. Doesn't happen, but I always kind of chuckle at the fact that they were able to. As you can see here, though, Peach was able to take a pretty commanding lead for a while, though, during the course of the race after we ended up completing that first lap, so bypassing Mario finally, and then finally able to bypass Peach, and then going into lap 3 fully at the front of the pack. There's no indicator or anything on screen in front of you to kind of give you an idea of how far your opponents end up being. That would have been kind of cool for them to do, but I'm sure it would have been a little bit difficult. But there could have been maybe a mini map or something included maybe at the bottom or somewhere on the screen itself. Either way, once I have that commanding lead, thankfully, I have full ability to be able to kind of move in between the puddles and knock any of my opponents if they end up trying to sneak up from behind. Once I have that lead, I just focus more on hitting the jumps correctly and making those little wheelies and doing my best to try to get in between the puddles, but even at your fastest of moving on the D-pad, you're going to end up hitting the puddles, or at least clipping the puddles a little bit usually during the course of the race. The controls work rather well, but even with the decent controls, there are a few times where it doesn't quite go up or down right when I want to. Thankfully, on the final lap, I'm still in the lead, even after hitting a couple of piles of dirt. Thankfully, the opponents weren't able to get ahead of me during the course of that. Here, I'm just going to move in between, not even having to do those little wheelies, because knowing my luck on the last lap or something, I would end up crashing trying to do those little short wheelies over those bumps. But I'm able to finish the race just ahead of Toad and Mario as they kind of get past me at the end. And then we get to move on to the jump contest. Unfortunately, jump contest number 3 is the same as jump contest number 1 as far as the placement of the ramp. So I'm only going to show it twice here on the jumping before we then will move on to the next race. On my second attempt, I'm able to get a pretty good amount and land there, getting a 32 and 30 centimeter here. And now we're going to move on to the next race after waiting for the time to run out. The only thing that I noticed different from this bonus jump compared to that first one after course 1 is the time that you have to do bonus jumps is definitely a lot shorter. I only have a chance for a couple of attempts overall, whereas the first time making it to the bonus jumps, I had a lot of attempts in order to try to get a really good jump. It only keeps the best jump that you end up making, so if you get a really good one on your first attempt, of course you can just kind of wait things out, and you don't have to wait too long when it comes to jump contest number 3 and the final one later on. Course number 4 is the final course of the game, and with that, of course, it's gonna be the toughest for us to deal with. Lots of various threats. These little things right here, we have plenty of hard-to-do ramps where you have to really time your angles and get them just right as you're making those jumps so that you'll be able to avoid running into things. Unfortunately, I ended up using my super too long here, and I ended up overheating as I'm trying to make my way through this and gather a few coins. The thing is, though, there's no coins set up on the map itself. And you can see, though, just from me doing my practice lap, that it can be difficult to kind of get the overall hang and flow of this track. After doing a practice, though, it's time to move on to the actual race itself. And I'll have to do my best to try to get the superpower early on by running into my opponents so that I'll be able to kind of boost as far as I can ahead. At the very beginning, you can make a very quick turn upwards on the D-pad so that you'll be able to take out usually 2, if not 3 Koopa Troopas. I'm able to take out a third one and then take your time, go very slowly if you're not in the lead, so that you can wait for the opponents to kind of go over some of the bumps. Trying to take them out sometimes will just end up causing you to run into the back of them if you're going too fast, especially with those little wheelie-like things that you'll have to do. I end up sometimes crashing into the back of the guys just ahead of me, so it's best to kind of take your time during the first lap until the whole group of racers is a little bit more spread apart. It takes a while, but eventually I'm able to kind of get the jump on Mario and Toad and be able to get my superpower, but even while trying to get it, I end up running into some of the extra dirt piles. Mario, thankfully, ends up running into me, but either way, once I have that super ability, the problem is them maintaining it. Some of these jumps, as you've seen, are very difficult in order to get my bike just perfectly lined up so I can hit them at the right angle to kind of do a little hop over them instead of ending up full out crashing. Since this is one of the few Satellaview games that was a completely unique game, not a remix or a re-release or just modification of another existing game, it really would have been awesome to see this actually put together as a full game, released maybe even in North America. My guess, though, for why we never saw it, though, was not really that it was for the Satellaview, but more so, I'm sure, because it was done in 1997. In fact, the second half of it didn't take place till November of 1997, which was so late in the Super Famicom's lifespan. I'm not surprised at all that we didn't even see inklings of this being brought over in any way. But it really would have been cool to not only have all the tracks and characters, but bring back that edit mode and have an Excitebike sequel for the Super Nintendo. I would have absolutely loved that back in the day. On the final lap, I just have to kind of stay ahead here of Mario and Peach and Toad. They're going to be trying to get me. A couple of really tough jumps there near the end, but thankfully the opponents run right into the back of me. As I make my way down that last little bit, Peach crashes, and Peach could have easily beaten me with just a little bit better control of her bike, but I win the race and we move on to the final jump contest. After completing this jump contest, you then have another of the Boo bonus games. Here I'm just going to do one solid big jump and then we'll move on to the next part. Just like before, once the time runs out, you'll have your total score racked up and you can kind of see how you did on the course itself, your lap times, as well as your best jump, and then we move on to the Boo bonus game. This Boo jumping contest is similar to the one we did just a little while ago, and your goal is to see how many of the Boos you can jump over within the given time, and after completing a lap of it, you'll have your Boo score totaled up, and then you'll get to jump again, trying to see if you can get better or get as many of the Boos as you did on your previous jump. And all of this, of course, is just adding a little bit of extra point score before we actually get to see our final total score at the end of the game itself. If you time it right, you should be able to get 3 or 4 jumps fully through during the course of the Boo bonus game. The hardest part, though, about it really isn't the boos themselves, but being able to get that exact angle so that you'll land and bounce off the top of some of the boos and be able to propel yourself forward without accidentally clipping into them as you're riding along the other boos.
Here we go!
After my fourth jump over the boos, you can see the clock is about to go over. I only get 42 on my final jump, but either way, I get a whole bunch of extra bonus points. And then after this, we then go to our final results screen, where it calculates all of the total points that we got during the course of the 4 race courses, as well as the bonus jumps and the bonus boo levels. After a pretty significant time on the Wario screen here, unfortunately I don't know what the text says here, it then will finally roll over to that scorecard. You'll get to see your best lap times for the 4 races, and then your total combined time for your 4 best laps. And then after hitting the A button, you'll then get your final total score. After that, then, the game actually goes to a credits screen here, which I guess would have aired at the end of a given week's races, though I'm not exactly sure how it worked. Unfortunately, though, this is the best patched version of the game. I think the courses are actually different on some of the other ones, but this gives you a good idea of what exactly the game was and how it ended up playing, and just overall how cool it actually was, especially if you were able to afford the satellite service and had the Super Famicom back in the day in Japan. You got to play games that a lot of other people weren't able to play, not only in Japan just due to the price. It was pretty pricey, not only to get the hardware for the St. Giga Satellaview, but then to have the streaming service from St. Giga. If it wasn't for some people keeping the ROMs so that we would be able to then rip them later on and be able to eventually do some editing to patch them so that everyone in the world would be eventually able to play them, though, through emulation, these games would never have been seen again, as Nintendo has never really made much mention of them or seems to have really any interest whatsoever in ever bringing these games back. It would have been cool if Nintendo had gone back into the archives and maybe patched some of these games together or done some kind of rebroadcast on the Wii U or Wii's Virtual Console to just bring some life to some of these things that we never got a chance to actually play here in North America. Especially if they could have aired them in some way, shape, or form, especially with modern technology, to be able to include that original audio on a lot of the Satellaview games, since they have those like live orchestral-like music that was played or the voice acting that would take place. After seeing St. Giga roll up to the top of the screen and it fade out, we then go to one last screen in the game, which unfortunately is a generic screen that you see at the end no matter what. We have Wario sitting there in second place, Luigi I guess in third, Toad isn't even on the platform, and then Peach is kissing Mario. I guess she's just happy that Mario won, even though technically in my game, Wario would be the winner. You know, I doubt Peach would have kissed him, but either way, you also see the trophy, though, in the background. After a little bit at this screen, it will then go back to the opening screen, and you can start the game all over again. But with that, that's going to wrap up this episode of Play It Through. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, consider giving a thumbs up or commenting down below. If you enjoyed this obscure Mario Satellaview game, be sure to check out the one I did last week for BS Super Mario Bros. USA Power Challenge. Basically a modified version of Mario 2. I also need to thank all the members of my Patreon. You guys are helping me keep this channel alive with your monthly support. You can also help out if you aren't a member of the Patreon. There's a link right down below. You can click that little Patreon button, and there's some cool incentives for becoming a member of my Patreon. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching, all your support, and of course, I hope you enjoy.